To order. This is the November 21st, 2024 meeting of the Land Use Advisory Committee. We have an agenda which, as long as everybody's okay with, we'll proceed, and I'm not seeing anybody looking crabby, so we'll keep going. And then the approval of the July 18th, 2024 meeting minutes. We have a motion from Phil. Second from Bill. Any changes or corrections? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. We have minutes. And so we will just jump right into our information items here. The 2050 local forecast, next steps, that would be Todd. And let's go fast, okay? Because we got a lot on the agenda.
Fast. Thank you for the invitation to be here. I'm Todd Graham. I'm the principal forecaster at Met Council Research. I'm going to start with fast, why we forecast and how it fits with planning. But mainly this presentation is just a status report. The Imagine 2050 public hearing ended 6 weeks back. Since then, we've been ingesting the public hearing record, preparing responses, and as appropriate, tweaking Imagine 2050 material or adjusting planning. So the forecast set is a part of the council's development guide. There is no metro-wide remodeling of all the local forecasts at this point. Instead, we are going to bring forward a batch of one city at a time adjustments from what was heard during the public hearing. Just to situate this topic, our team for local forecasts is called to answer where and when are growth expected and how much growth. And this work matters at Met Council because both Met Council and local governments are involved in systems planning and infrastructure provision and services delivery. And we have an expectation of Met Council and local governments all planning for the same future. This on screen is a list of ways that local forecasts are used and by cities. And the second set of bullets is how local forecasts fit into local comp plan requirements. At times, some local governments have been concerned about forecasts for their jurisdictions, and I think this happens because some local planners or city managers have an idea of the importance of forecasts, maybe an exaggerated feeling that the forecast can impel their infrastructure provision or withhold the infrastructure provision. And in that sense, there is an idea that Met Council is making the future happen. But council staff's viewpoint is not that. We believe that development does not just happen because it's in this table of forecasts. So over the last 20 years, I've seen places speculate. Well, some places have had ideas about their forecasts, and the forecasts have failed spectacularly. Places where something was built and then no one came, and that's something we're trying to avoid. So I would suggest that we all look at it as the council is not trying to incite growth or force growth in specific places. Instead, we're trying to anticipate how will the regional dynamics that exist, how will market forces in the real estate market, how will those channel the growth? So we're not picking winners, the broad range of behavior and choices pick the winners. And what I suggest, this approach is market responsive and also the best path to planning success, both Met Council's success and also our local government partners. By the way, just to dispel one of the urban-suburban myths that's out there, there is no forcing of growth to specific places. There's not a penalty that is imposed on a community that develops less than expected. So I've said a lot here about why local governments consider the forecasts important, and some of you may have an angle on that, and if the chairwoman allows it, we welcome hearing about it. I may learn something new. But my main assignment, again, is just a progress, a status update. Our team has been working on local forecasts all year, also previous to this year. Last winter, we had a show and tell process with a preliminary version 1 forecast set, and we invited informal comments at that time. Jumping ahead, we proceeded to the public hearing version 2 local forecasts that were published in August. I'll say more on that in the next slide. And on this timeline, we're now between the green and blue dots. We will publish a proposed local forecast set in December, and we'll be asking Met Council to adopt the local forecast as part of Imagine 2050. Here's what you might want to know about the work this past summer. We brought into our model the last updates of observed data and other information that we thought the model should know. Next slide, we also coded up and introduced some process improvements. These process improvements were conceived to remedy issues that had been raised earlier in the year. And importantly, the last bullet on here, we left the region totals unchanged. We expect the addition of 320,000 households over 3 decades. That's still the expectation. And what we do with the local forecast model is we are just locating specifically where we expect that growth to happen. So where will the growth be? It will be distributed all across the region. This slide I do need to call out as needing a small correction. We are changing the community designations that we use. This is part of Imagine 2050. So there will not be an emerging suburban edge category anymore. It will be glommed together with suburban edge and emerging suburban edge, all just becomes suburban edge. So the last bullets on here should say 33% of the growth will be in urban centers and urban communities, 23% in suburban communities, 38% in combined suburban edge and emerging suburban edge. And that is the largest share. 6% in rural communities. These are just details though. The takeaway idea is growth is very much distributed, all types of communities, and the largest share in those places where the developed footprint of the region is moving outward. Yes. So version 2 forecasts are on our website. Version 3 will be published in December and brought to Met Council will have it, I think, as an informational item on December 18, and then it will be part of the Imagine 2050 approval in February. Moving ahead, what we heard during the public hearing process. Out of the hundreds of comments on Imagine 2050, there were just 35 that were forecast related. There were a few questions about the region totals. Some of these were the same questions you asked when I presented to you in May. And turning to local forecasts, we did not hear from most communities. A few places like Minneapolis and Brooklyn Park and Blaine did go out of their way to send us a letter saying, this looks fine. Which is appreciated. The rest of the comments about local forecasts usually had an agenda, something they wanted. They did request or encourage some local forecast adjustments. Most of those adjustments are small. So here are a few notes on how I went about engaging with the comments and requests. We approved most adjustments to the extent those could be accommodated. Some of those requests were just exceedingly small, so it required nothing major to agree to change the forecast for a place by 11 households or something like that. That was the most recent request, yes. Only a handful of the requests were very large changes. A few requests were refused as the requesters did not really explain, or they may not have understood what was being forecasted. There were instances of cities not always having solid information on just how many jobs are in their jurisdiction. There was one very strident letter saying, there's no way our community can reach 2,000 jobs. They'll be getting a response saying, you're already at 2,000 jobs. So we're okay with setting the forecast at 2,000 jobs if you want that to be the 2050 number. A few requests were refused because the desired numbers were excessive or we had provided adjustments earlier. And then finally, in the remaining bunch, we proposed halfway compromises. There's one community that's very insistent that they will add 12,000 households. Year after year, it will be 400 new homes every year for the next 30 years without a construction downturn at any point. So we did not agree to that number, but we did agree to 10,000 instead of 12,000. So we try to meet the community's part way. Moving toward our wrap up, I may actually be ahead of time. Yes?
That's okay.
Okay. Just 2 or 3 slides left. Again, there's no metro-wide remodeling or rerunning of the model for this next update. Instead, we're just bringing forward a batch of one city at a time adjustments from what was the public hearing version. The resulting forecast table will be an appendix to Imagine 2050. The local forecasts are connected to policy and have the force of policy in the ways that I outlined at the start of the presentation. Based on what we've heard, we think there is substantial agreement or consent with this forecast set. If some communities are dissatisfied, that doesn't prevent Met Council from doing its responsibility. One of the more curious comments that we received during the public hearing was a local government communicating that they will not agree. But this is immaterial since the preparation of the forecasts is a Met Council responsibility assigned by state law. It's not a local government responsibility. So we've asked for and considered the comments, but the process this fall should not be misunderstood as something that cities are going to hold up. It's not. Now, the good news is we are willing to hear requests and negotiate at subsequent steps in the planning cycle and the comp plan process. This on screen is like 5 different points where we can engage with local governments about their specific local forecasts, which is to say we're really never done with this. These are all steps along the way where cities and towns can request that the forecast be adjusted and reconsidered. And what's important to us at Met Council is that Met Council and the local planners are ultimately working from the same numbers. We practice communicative planning. In the area of forecasts, we're willing to hear them out, to be flexible, to revisit and revise forecasts. It's just an acknowledgement that the future is conditioned partly on our plans, and their plans can change. And that's usually the reason that cities are asking for forecast adjustments, is that something has changed in their plan. In summer next year, Met Council will take action to insert the local forecasts into system statements. Beyond that point, next summer, Met Council staff have had a process requirement. It's not a law, it's a process we have. And the process is that we avoid further tinkering with the forecasts unless there's an agreement or at least consent from the local governments. Because at the point that we've issued them a system statement, they're taking that as the authoritative instruction set on how to do their comp plan, and the forecasts are in there. So this is a decision that came from our agency executives 2 decades ago in 2005. At that time, Met Council leaders wanted the forecasts to be sort of frozen following the system statements, so that so that no one will feel like the goalposts have been moved. And because that became the rule, forecasts can be adjusted after system statements if local governments and Met Council agree to it. But or at least if they consent to it. So we're not going to force any forecast changes that the cities would not know about. And Madam Chair, that's my presentation.
Thank you. Questions, comments?
Not related to this, but whoever made the pie, thank you. It's
I
very
did.
good.
Okay, that's an important comment.
Yes.
Yes,
You might wanna mark that down as your most favorite comment.
It's my most favorite comment. Anything else? Yeah?
Just, I understand that you wanna kind of freeze the model in place as cities and local entities go through all of their comp planning process and everything, and that makes sense.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know if it's ever happened, but I was just imagining if there's some huge shift in the world, like a pandemic or something like that, that could have a major impact on, you know, that next 30 years, is that ever something that can be looked at or can be initiated? Maybe not because a local entity is saying we would like to talk about a change, but just because of the global picture, instead of X number coming in the next 30 years, it's gonna be, you know, only 75% of that, or it's gonna be double that, or something like that, because of some phenomenal thing. I mean, is there a way, I'm assuming the planning process doesn't just shut down after the next year?
Madam Chair.
Forecasting.
I would say, one of our objective in 2005 that I was talking about was that the forecasts on our website and in comp plans will be the same number. So we are not wanting to force cities to, we're not wanting to force 180 something local places to change their comp plans. But we do have the door open for them to come and ask for a change. And then also, as you saw one slide back, this is a cycle that we repeat every decade. So we'll be back here in 10 years talking about the 2060 forecasts.
Well, and we've had that happen. I mean, we had the big downturn, the crash of the economy right after we came out with everything. And a lot of cities were not coming anywhere near what their forecasts were gonna be, but we kind of left it up to the cities. Did they wanna actually ask for an official change, or were they okay just dealing with life as it was? And so if there was a request for an official change, we did that. If they didn't care, then we just left it alone, knowing that it wasn't gonna happen because the world had changed.
We address it in the next planning process.
Right.
Yeah, if I may, Madam Chair, I
Wait,
applaud,
Phil had his
No,
hand
go ahead.
up. Okay,
no, I applaud what you've done. I'm guessing this is a real small number compared to 10 years ago. As
Small
far as-
number of
changes?
requests, yes,
Yeah.
it is.
Yeah, no, not knowing the 18 cities, I think one of them is in my territory. It's the newest city in the metro, and they do not like the Met Council since becoming a city from a township.
They didn't like us a whole lot when they.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
I think it's one of the 18.
Is this Credit River or Empire?
Empire.
Okay.
Good guess.
Phil,
Thank you, Madam Chair. Todd, this is getting out a little bit further, but I went onto the website of the Minnesota State Demographic Center just to find out where our population is at as far as age-wise. Because as we continue to get older, right now it's looking at from 2024 to 2075, 65 plus age group will be more than double.
Yes.
And that's something that, as we continue to keep growing and expanding, where this job's gonna be, is kind of wondering where's the workforce gonna be at that time. And I just, we'll be taking that into the calculations as we move forward. I mean, this is a little bit ahead of putting that cart ahead of the horse, but that's one of the things.
well, we already had that when we had the overall regional forecast, they break it down demographically, but we don't break it down at the individual city levels.
No, okay, but overall. But I mean, it's, from that perspective, I don't know if, technology's gonna be changing as well, but as we get older, just keeping informed about the demographics and where they're heading into the future, just let me send it out there as well.
Yeah, Madam Chair and Member Klein, we did take into consideration that there are different market segments, demand segments, types of households. And one of those household types that we explicitly counted and represented was senior citizen households. You are correct, that ends up being the fastest growing demographic, and a lot more, twice as many senior households before we are done with this planning horizon. So with each of those market segments being individually represented as having its numbers and its part of the demand, the type of real estate that would be wanted by senior households was one of the things that went into the local forecasts and probably did keep the forecasts, did keep the distribution closer to the beltway, closer to the center. So it has been represented, and you are correct that is a fast growing segment of the future households.
Anybody else? Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes.
And next up, we have the update to the 2050 community designations. Angela,
Yep, that's me. It's okay, can I just?
you can stay right there, that's fine. What? Oh,
So I'm just going to go right into it. I'm just gonna give some background, a reminder of like what the work has been in this committee in particular, go through some proposed changes, and then just briefly talk about next steps. So you might remember that this was part of your entire 2022 LUAC work plan. It was on absolutely every single agenda that entire year. And you did a lot of conversations around variables and different analysis points. But there were also engagement with focus groups, there was engagement with council committees and an internal focus group as well. And so just to remind you, like, this has been passed on to CDC and your recommendations made it to Met Council. They endorsed this formally in 2023. Just a quick reminder to who participated in the external focus group. In addition to the external focus group and the internal focus group that I mentioned, we did hold this open for public comment. There was a community survey that went out with all of the information around community designations. I think that was held open for a month for comment, and then we adjusted after that. So let's just quickly talk about the changes. I'm putting kind of the original Thrive map up here just for reference. You might remember that we started with 5 variables, we ended up with 4 variables. We started with 5 urban service area designations, we ended up with 4. This was what was presented and endorsed by the Met Council as part of the 90% draft designations. And then now we come to changes. I'm moving quickly.
yes,
Okay.
thank you.
So, the changes were really based on discussions that we were having with local governments. We know that we knew in May, after the density analysis was complete, that we would need to review the community designations analysis again and likely make some manual adjustments. We did that through conversation with local governments. We needed to also correct some errors. I'll talk about that in the next slide. There were some mapping adjustments for communities that have more than one designation. You probably won't see those as evident on the map, but it's adjustments around the edges for some local governments. You'll see that show up in the text of the policy plan. You'll see both upwards and downwards adjustments, mostly in the urban service area. And these are the community-specific changes. There are 15 communities that we're proposing to adjust. We've talked with all of these communities one-on-one. As I mentioned, the sector reps spoke with each of the communities, especially the ones that were moving to a designation with a higher density requirement. These ones in particular were corrected to reflect their Thrive community designation. For example, South St. Paul and West St. Paul in Thrive were both urban center and had originally in the 90% draft been proposed for urban edge, which is a reduction from Thrive. And communities were already meeting the proposed imagined density, and so, or were expecting to, and so those are proposed changes to urban for consistency. So urban in Thrive back to urban in Imagine. Birchwood Village is in the White Bear Lake area, and we're not supposed to reflect any changes. That entire area was held static because of the various water issues that are going on in that area. So that was overlooked, and so we made that correction as well. And in a letter, Birchwood Village requested to stay suburban, and we obviously agree. That was missed in our initial analysis. Typically, there isn't a downward application of community designations, which means a community designation that generally reflects a lower minimum density expectation. However, with the proposed density changes, this reflects communities like the Lake Minnetonka communities in particular, Medicine Lake as an example, where they may have been suburban in Thrive, which is 5 units an acre. They were actually reduced to suburban edge, which is a proposed density of 4 units per acre in Imagine 2050. This is because they're either fully developed, they're not anticipated to have substantive growth forecasted in 2050, or for consistency with similar communities and known development patterns. So you'll see some communities are now in a less developed community designation than Thrive, which is unusual, but we are taking into consideration the full scope of changes that are included currently in land use policy and taking a different approach. So this is the final proposed designation for consideration in the Imagine 2050 adopted version. We'll obviously get council feedback on this before. You'll probably just see kind of changes around the edges. There's only 15 communities, so I didn't call them out specifically on the map, but this is the map that we would include in the policy language. So what's left for us to do is to integrate the changes into the final draft policy plan. We will make any final changes as the council directs if they have feedback that they want to include. We have that planned on the Community Development Committee meeting for discussion on December 2nd. And all of this is working towards the adoption of Imagine 2050 in February of 2025. So I will open for questions on community designations.
Thank you. Questions, comments? Pretty straightforward.
Seems like.
Thank you. Oh, Jerry.
Well, I just have a quick thing. I grew up in Excelsior, so I've seen how Excelsior is. Do they really meet that 1-to-5 ratio? Excelsior? It does. How does it do that? Because you have downtown, which takes up a section of, and all the business sells up Water Street, takes up a lot of area of the town. Any new houses in town are 3 times the size of the old ones, so
Chair and committee members.
just curious.
Yeah, what communities do is in Thrive, they planned for only areas that they were planning to develop, newly develop or redevelop. And so they don't include the entire land within the community as they're planning, just areas of change in Thrive. And so that's the areas that we calculate the minimum density on, and it's in a lot of communities, it's one property that they, especially in really developed communities, a single project could meet the minimum requirement, a single area or corridor, or a redevelopment that they're hoping might happen. And they do that through various ways. They can accommodate the large areas single-family development by having higher density elsewhere, so they can have a range of density. So the areas of higher density actually usually accommodate most of that, so that they can continue developing some of the other areas as low-density residential.
Okay.
Does that help?
Anything else?
Just quick question if I could, Madam Chair. Do you have any data in the last 10 years? When seeing redevelopment, I'm guessing it's a significant increase on density. And part of the reason is because of the cost. But would you have any model or saying it's 30 units an acre generally in a redeveloped or including even suburban?
Chair and committee members, I don't have that off the top of my head, but I can tell you from observation of when we get comprehensive plan amendments, the trend is definitely, when they're making land use changes, increasing in density. And a lot of, the majority of the comprehensive plan amendments that come in are in the suburban edge and emerging suburban edge areas. And so that's where the development is happening, and it is trending upwards.
Anybody else? Okay, thank you.
Okay.
That brings us to the Imagine 2050 Land Use Public Comment Overview. You're still up.
I'm still up, and I'm still gonna stay right here.
That's fine.
Okay, so as you know, the public comment period closed, but I want to just kind of set the conversation, really remembering all of the other engagement that's been done over the past 4 years. The public comment period is just one part of the overall engagement that's been done for the Imagine 2050 process. We started from the 2040 local comp plan analysis, local government panels, discussions with partners across the region to build a data-based foundation of information and experiences across the region. We established topical focus groups, community organization cohorts, young leader collaborations, the American Indian Advisory Council, council member working groups. We have a regional planning advisory group with metro cities. We did surveys, we held events, participated in community events, a whole slew of things over the last 4 years. So the formal public comment, in addition, the formal public hearing was held in September, and now the formal public comment period closed in early October. So this is the culmination then of all of those efforts, which will be reflected in the final plan. So today, we're only talking about the public comment period, which is a piece of overall engagement that we've done for Imagine 2050. As I mentioned, the formal comment period closed in early October. We received more than 1,200 individual comments from nearly 500 organizations and individuals through these various avenues. I also, because we're remembering a lot of things today, want to remember how much LUAC played a part in all of the policy work in the land use plan. So you've been a critical part of developing the work, and we started building that in 2021 when we started with information and analysis. In 2022, we worked, as I mentioned in the previous presentation, primarily on community designations as well as regional vision and values. In 2023, we dug into the scenario planning analysis, which helped us to understand how the council can be resilient to a future based on different growth and development possibilities. We started working on land use objectives and density analysis, and this year we focused heavily on land use objectives, policies, and actions. So again, just wanting to thank you all for your work on these policy plans as well. So, what have we heard, especially about land use? We'll start with overall themes because the majority of the feedback on land use came from local governments. And so just wanting to give a bigger picture for the entire Imagine 2050 plan. All 7 counties participated, comments and participation from people or local government officials in every county. Dakota and Scott, about 2/3 participated. Anoka, Hennepin, Ramsey, and Washington, about 50%. Carver, about 40%. The numbers of direct comments from individuals is significantly higher than in previous regional development guide formal comment processes. And all 10 park implementing agencies had extensive input. And in fact, Three Rivers Park District letter mentioned that they had less public comments because there was such a good job done with input already. So some positive feedback throughout. High-level themes from residents. Residents generally provide high-level comments about whether or not the vision, values, and goals resonated with them in their lived experience. Residents don't speak about land use policy and density in the same way as a technical local government staff might, or someone that's within the field. Residents wanted to make sure that the needs of disabled people, elders, and youth were served by the 2050 policies. Overall, residents overwhelmingly supported climate change mitigation from the council. Cost and affordability were important, including financial access to housing, transportation, and other necessities. Residents want the region to be accessible to people with disabilities and in compliance with ADA requirements. There was some geographic diversity about opinions regarding the Met Council and policies related to density and community designation. A smaller number of residents provided feedback about specific policy areas, in particular land use and transportation, which were the most frequently commented on policy chapters throughout. Comments on land use policy included density requirements, the importance of council relations with indigenous communities, and support for natural systems protection. Transportation comments were mainly in support for transit investments, a reduction in personal vehicle use, and a need for specific investments in their community. There was wide support for pedestrian and biking alternatives for personal vehicles as well. High-level themes from nonprofit and advocacy organizations. In general, they tended to provide, again, more high-level comments about support or lack thereof of policies, particularly recommendations to strengthen policies from the lens of their organization's mission. Generally, advocacy organizations offered support for the direction the Met Council was heading, particularly around climate and housing. Some organizations encouraged the council to go further. Advocacy organizations often offered specific actions for neighborhood and local level implementation, and such organizations also offered insights around tools, funding strategies, and statutes that the Met Council could leverage to further equity-related policies outlined in the policy plans. While some organizations provided comments by separate policy areas, many advocacy organizations took a more integrated and intersectional approach. So those comments really describe the intersections between different policy areas and encourage internal collaboration. So now land use specifically. I don't know why my slides aren't moving forward. Laptop. Okay. So advocacy organizations offered high-level supportive comments for land use and density, indicating that it's tied to benefits for climate change mitigation, affordable housing, and overall growth throughout the region. They offered recommendations related to flexibility and minimum requirements, transit station areas, performance metrics, and opportunities for streamlining processes for affordable housing permits. I wanted to mention that because, like I said, most of the comments around land use and density are from local government, so I wanted to make sure you had the perspective of residents and other commenters from advocacy organizations as well. So the high-level themes then from local governments, there was overall support for the alignment with regional goals and values. I'll offer that one community said, "We value the professional planning, detailed process, and well-thought-out guidance in the draft Imagine 2050 Land Use Policy Plan." Many of the letters began this way and were followed with ideas and requests for clarification, technical assistance, implementation flexibility, and ongoing collaboration. The themes around concerns related to the impact of the overall planning process on communities, areas of council authority and local control. Other concerns were related to the cost of development and housing, the desire to maintain the historic character of a community. There was concern about land use policy being disadvantageous to suburban and rural communities, and concerns about externalities which may impact implementation. We'll dig into some of this a little bit more. So this image, represents the percentage of local governments by community designation, just to give you the idea of the regional breakdown. The total public comment period responses received represent 29% of cities and townships. Suburban edge communities had a high participation, where rural centers, suburban, urban edge, and urban communities each had at least a quarter of their communities participating. There was less participation from communities in the rural service area, which makes sense because their policies and designations didn't change from Thrive. There were also 10 communities that met with sector reps but did not submit a formal public comment as well. That's not all that they spoke to, but most of the communities that they connected with provided a formal public comment letter. I just didn't want to lose the fact that those other 10 communities also provided feedback for us. So there were 130 communities across all designations that didn't comment, which can be for a number of reasons. We can assume that some of the non-commenting communities were not opposed to policies. Opposition is more likely to be expressed than support. I think you'll probably know that from your own local government experiences. We may not have heard from local communities due to resource constraints or prioritization of staff effort. On the other hand, they may have had enough opportunity for input that they didn't feel a need to respond as well. There was a lot of support offered, starting from the positive vein. There was a lot of support offered, let's focus on that too. Appreciation of the flexible application of density requirements, of collaboration and engagement throughout the process, and the intersectional connections across policy areas. A lot of the rural service area communities' comments were supportive of the council taking a role in resolving annexation issues, supportive of mixed-use development, and supportive of walkability. They appreciated the details of how MUSA expansion will be evaluated, the policy efforts to protect natural systems, supportive of more diverse and affordable housing. Local governments were largely supportive of ideas around walkability, community connections, affordable housing, adequate public transportation, climate mitigation, and natural system protection is universal across all community designations. It's the one area of consistent agreement in all plans.
What was that last part? What was the?
Natural system preservation
Oh, okay.
is a consistent, okay.
Yes, yeah. I just didn't hear.
It wasn't density, don't worry. So then, we know and expected that density would be a primary topic of most of the land use feedback. So I want to share a bit about that before we get to the specific areas of concern expressed by local governments. Of all comments received, 93% submitted comments on land use, both land use and transportation, again, being the highest mentioned policy areas. Specific to density, we know that throughout the region, 82% of communities did not express concern or objection. This includes those that submitted letters and more than half of the suburban edge communities. Ag and rural center communities, as well as urban and urban edge communities, expressed less concern about the density requirement changes. We also know that of the communities that provided feedback, many were concerned or opposed to density increases, specifically in the suburban edge area. The areas of opposition, though, represent 17% of all communities in the region. We also know that of the communities that provided feedback, many had concerns about or opposed density increases, specifically in the suburban edge area. The communities expressing, the remaining 150 communities expressed support, did not submit letters, or were unclear in their view. Suburban edge expressed more concern than other communities, with a smaller percentage of suburban communities registering concern. Again, rural residential and diversified rural policies didn't change from Thrive. So there were consistent themes as areas of concern for local governments that provided feedback: concern about local infrastructure infrastructure services related to the density requirements, concern about harm to community character and that the market wouldn't support an increase, or that there isn't political support for density changes. Consistently concerned about flexibility as it applies to density policy implementation, and concerned that there would be negative outcomes as a result of the density policy. So the next steps and timeline, I've shown this with you before, but here's the overall regional development guide timeline. We're here in that blue line, top to bottom, just at the end of the fourth quarter of 2024. Let me show you a little bit more specific though, the schedule as the policy areas are all working on revisions and final changes to get us to adoption in February. Land use policy will be discussed at the CDC meeting on December 2nd, along with the regional vision and values and the housing policy chapter. Parks started at the last CDC meeting on November 18th, and you can see where the other transportation, ES, and housing and parks areas are all going through the committee as well. That being said, we also attached to the materials a full list of all of the comments that were received specifically to land use and density, and that included a separate sheet in the workbook for the social pinpoint, which is the online resident engagement portion. The comments were a little harder to pull
They were
out into.
very hard to read.
Yeah, it's very, the way that
Like
that
this all over.
feedback came into us was hard. But I wanted to make sure that you knew about all of the comments related to land use and what we had received thus far. So with that then, Chair, I'll turn that over to you.
So hopefully you guys had some fun time reading through all of this. I read it
This
all.
is much appreciated.
Comments, questions? Jerry?
Under the land use policy, local government concerns, you have no new density requirements will have negative outcomes. What were those? What were the concerns about negativity?
Chair and Committee Member Bruner, a lot of the concerns about the negative outcomes that I remember in all of the letters that I have read were a lot about community character, a lot that their neighborhood character would change with an increase from 3 to 4 in particular. Concern that infrastructure isn't available or built to a level to accommodate additional density. There were others as well, but I think that from my recollection, those were the big ones.
John?
Read it first. I think that originally the Met Council, I think, was started for mostly sewer. And at that time, it was the density required to have the sewer run efficiently was 3 per acre. And so, I mean, it's extremely frustrating to have density requirements go from 3 an acre to 4 an acre when the impact is gonna be felt by just the edge. And I think it's a bridge way too far. Negative repercussions, I just think it's an overreach to have what was originally a sewer requirement now turns into, after 40 years, every town is developed with a 3 to 1, and then our new towns have to develop 4 to 1 under the new standard. Especially, I mean, something like we would, in Corcoran, we're probably gonna not wanna develop, so if there's it's hard enough to get people to accept 3 to 1, 4 to 1 is gonna be not palatable. And I just think it's interesting that other people's comments about what other towns should do should carry so much weight. They should, if they've got an issue or concern, they could address it in their own town, and not make the newest developing cities carry all the burden of development. And it's really, really frustrating having so much of the terms of our town being dictated to us by the Met Council. It's why we don't typically trust the Met Council, or like the Met Council from our standpoint, how heavy-handed they are in a lot of the policies, including density requirements. It's really frustrating. We don't know what we're gonna do, but we don't like it. I don't know what actions we can do as a town, but we've talked about them, the negative repercussions of some of these new expectations.
Bill?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I have a number of things that kind of piggyback on what Jonathan had mentioned. I know that you had mentioned that there's a lot of positive feedback, but from reading from the comments that were submitted by the just local communities, I didn't see a lot of positive on the density requirements at all. From our standpoint, 3 to 5 is as far as building units per acre is enough. I looked at Corcoran, Carver County, or Carver. I looked at Leno Lakes, Hugo. There's other surrounding communities. They have the same issues. Bloomington has the same issues. They're trying to figure out how they're going to handle the infrastructure from a sewer standpoint, from a water standpoint, from a transportation standpoint. And that kind of covers all of it. On slide 14, that covers a lot of this, the concerns that you had on these. And I think they need to be addressed. And there needs to be some flexibility in the ability for these communities to do what they need to do, because they can better manage it, the growth themselves, as opposed to having someone else dictate it to them. The other thing that was concerning was the greenhouse gas emission requirements that were placed on these communities, as well as ours. How are we supposed to do that? Where are we going to get the technology that, to monitor all these emissions and stuff? That's a concern. And who's going to fund it? The other thing is, maybe we should, instead of looking at trying to expand our housing stock, maybe we should look at trying to preserve what we have. Because it seems like whenever we have new housing stock come in, developers buy these lots or large lots, and they bulldoze the homes down, and they put up these big buildings, and they're not affordable. They're not workforce housing developments. They're all upscale apartment complexes and condos, and it destroys the character of the community, as well as doesn't allow affordability for individuals to buy or purchase these homes. The other thing is geography, where the communities are located. We have wetlands in some areas, there are poor subsoils in others that don't allow infrastructure. I think those need to be considered when we start looking at these density mandates. What else is there? Okay. Anyway, I think that's it. But for the most part, we need to leave flexibility, allow flexibility within the communities to do what they need to do. I think they have a better idea of what they can do. It's not that they don't want to do it, it's just that they have to have the ability to try to work through these goals and try to achieve the goals that you would like to have them achieve. Don't tell them what they have to do. Don't put mandates on them, if you would please. And just basically listen to what they would have to say.
Do you have any response to either of those?
I can, I don't know if
You don't have to, I'm just asking, giving you the opportunity.
Yeah, I'm not advocating, so I
Okay.
can respond to questions and provide information, happy to. So when you're talking about flexibility and the things that are, and like the geography, those are not areas that are required to be included in the density calculations now. And we will be looking at updating our administrative guidelines, which further look into what's included in density calculations and what's not. Areas that are not able to be developed are excluded from that. And communities are only required to plan for areas where they're accommodating forecasted growth. So a lot of communities, especially the small ones, not Hugo, don't have any forecasted growth. They were either, fairly stable from 2040 to 2050. A lot of the smaller communities in particular won't have areas where they will need a substantive change to accommodate. We are looking at all kinds of different things for flexibility. We're looking at a shorter look-back period for the plat monitoring program, which is a credit-bearing program where communities that provide plats on an annual basis get credit for how they're actually developing, because we always calculate density from the lowest range of a density category, of a land use category. But development doesn't always come in at the lowest end of the density category, it comes in the middle, generally. There's a lot of flexibility in density ranges. And so that program gives credit to communities for where they're actually developing at a higher density. A shorter look back period will actually, right now it goes back to 2000 or when a community started participating in the program. And development in 2000 is very different from the development in the last 10 years. And a shorter look back period can help a lot of communities achieve that. And a lot of communities are already planning at those densities. The density recommendations reflected the average in the community designation as to what communities are currently planning.
I mean, Madam Chair, on the credits that you mentioned too, thank you for bringing that up. There was, I think it was Bloomington, I believe. They had some questions as far as what that means as far as look back. What are the definitions of that? I mean, what are you actually looking at? What defines that?
Sure, Chair and committee members. Those are administrative guidelines, and plat monitoring is a program, and the criteria are always established by the council. And so those are implementation measures. So those specifics will currently carry over from Thrive until we update them after Imagine 2050 to reflect new policy, whatever those policies end up being. And so what's established right now are things that are allowed to be netted out are anything adopted by local ordinance. If you have a tree preservation ordinance, those are areas that are prevented from being developed. Wetland and buffer areas are already allowed to be excluded. When you're talking about the plat monitoring program, the timeline for that any changes to that plat monitoring program, we would bring to the council. When you're talking about a look back period right now, we're analyzing what that might look like and how it would impact communities that are participating in the program. A 10-year rolling look back period may make sense, but it's something that we would talk about with the council as an implementation on new policy.
Madam Chair. And one of the things is why can we not just leave the current density as it is, and then at the discretion of the community, allow them to determine whether or not they would like to increase that density and be flexible enough to allow that to happen?
Chair and committee members, it's not my decision first, but the reason that it is recommended is because communities are largely already doing it. It's also consistent with all of our regional goals, and the council has set really ambitious goals, and if we want to achieve them, we do have to take new tax, we do have to kind of take a different approach and use all of the tools in our toolbox. Some of the requirements like the GHG emissions and the climate planning that you were mentioning are things that came in state statute and things that we must do. For the GHG emissions, by the way, we have a tool already, and the communities can set their priorities and strategies and choose within that tool. You don't have to worry about the calculations or technology yourself. It's something that the council will provide an avenue for you to do that and make local planning decisions. We will do that largely with all of the new policies. Anywhere where we're saying we need X, Y, or Z in order to meet this regional goal, the council has a practice and a history of providing technical assistance, not only through tools and online platforms, but through financial resources. We have a planning assistance grant fund. We have a team of sector representatives that work with local governments all the time. We're looking at a new program for small communities in particular, that even the grant funds weren't enough to help them with the comprehensive planning process. And statute currently allows the council to offer planning consulting services. And so we're looking at how we might be able to do that planning for them. So looking at a wide suite of financial, technical, and other services that we can implement to help local governments through.
The other thing is transit. I know that those individuals, communities that have transit, light rail transit, some of them have bus rapid transit on BRT. Like some of us don't have that, like we're in Hugo, some of the outer Atlanta, suburban, emerging areas don't have that available. And if they have 4 units plus per acre or per unit, if that goes through and they do that, then what that's going to cause is we're going to have more emissions because we don't have rapid transit. That's going to be more car traffic because we're going to have more people commuting to and from work. Doesn't that defeat the purpose of having the emissions and all the other stuff that we're trying to save on?
Chair and committee members, thank you for being so thoughtful in your questions, first of all. Where we're talking about an increase in density, that isn't really what drives infrastructure costs. Growth does, and that's related to your forecasts. And if a community feels that they're unable to achieve that forecast, we work, as Todd was mentioning, we work with local governments all the time. If there is a reduction in forecasts necessary as a result of something like that, we would make those, we would have those conversations with the local governments. So it's growth that you're accommodating, not necessarily density. Communities already have a range of densities that they allow, and some have 1 unit per acre areas, and some have 20 unit per acre areas, and across the community that comes to an average, and that's what the density requirement is based on, that community average for where you're accommodating your forecasted growth. So it's not specifically related to density. Emissions, new population, that is just growth that you are accommodating, and the density doesn't increase your level of growth, it's just accommodating that growth in a smaller footprint.
In the short term, it does that, but in the long term, if you're keeping your people into a smaller footprint, eventually the city gets all the way to the border and ends up with more people overall than they would have had otherwise.
Chair and committee members, I mean, that's true. If you look at how Plymouth, for example, has evolved over the years, that's normal. Lakeville, Farmington, they used to be farm communities. And over time, communities develop in a variety of different ways at different densities.
Right, but like from what Phil and John are saying, and if you guys don't want to hear my opinion, I'll shut up, but I kind of feel like it's okay to weigh in. To me, it's communities are already accommodating market forces that ask for more density. There are some communities that are struggling to meet the 3 or right at 3, but a lot of other communities are accommodating whatever the new density is in the market and have changed, adding new classifications like the 1 level old people houses with no steps like Bill lives in.
It's a new one.
Oh,
tell you right now.
But,
They're high demand.
but, you know, they're even creating new land uses to deal with changes in the market and accommodating it where it makes sense for cities. But I can understand the feeling of that we're moving the goalposts here, because instead of saying just accommodate the market, it's saying the market needs to fundamentally change to be more dense regardless of what the market says. And for things like climate's not a regional system. You're talking, for greenhouse gas emissions, you're talking worldwide. So if you don't offer the kind of housing that people want here, then they go to Cannon Falls or Monticello or whatever, or they go to another state, and their greenhouse gas impact is going to be the same, just in a different state, which makes no difference to our local region, other than that we drove away somebody who might have had a job here and worked. I'm all about accommodating choices, but working collaboratively with cities to accommodate those choices in the market. And particularly when you're at the beginning of your development, like Corcoran is, the higher density stuff comes in little bunches, few and far between, and that it gets really hard in accommodating that minimum density. I mean, Lakeville went like 30 years without ever having a market rate apartment building built. It wasn't that they weren't allowing any, but developers didn't want to do it. So the CDA was building senior housing and subsidized, multifamily housing and whatnot, but there was no market for market rate housing. Now there's a ton of them that have gone up, thousands of units, because the market is there. Farmington is facing the same thing. They just had to offer a subsidy to get a market rate apartment after having only subsidized housing. And it feels like this doesn't accommodate the market forces that are really uneven, particularly at the edge of the metro in the development cycles. Questions, comments, anybody else? Jerry?
These don't necessarily reflect my thinking. However, this fall I was at some place and people knew I was on the Met Council. And they're not very pro-Met Council people, but they think Met Council is a lot to what Phil was talking about. They're trying to go into communities and tell them what to do. And so these people are saying, I think what they thinking are is the Met Council wants them to put in more units per acre because they want to get people who live in the inner cities to move out to the country. I mean, I tried, I couldn't persuade them, but I would like your comment on that. Is there any truth to that matter? You know, if it ever comes up again, I don't want to be flat-footed like it was the last time.
I don't think the
I
intent
didn't
is,
convince them one way or the other, but.
I don't think the intent is to move people from the core out. There's people going in both directions, but most of what I see of people that are living in the core moving out are moving out for single family when they have kids, so that they can have a yard and go to the local public school and whatnot, not just, it's more of an organic thing rather than and I have known people who lived out in my neck of the woods who've moved into downtown and lived in a condo because they want to go to Orchestra Hall all the time. So, I mean, it goes in both directions.
Chair.
Yes.
In addition to that, I would offer that particularly in the agricultural and rural areas, out Watertown where you are, Jerry, the council's policies really strive to protect those areas from development. And so really trying to protect ag land and the agricultural economy, which is why regional services like sewer aren't part of the connection and in those far reaching areas of the region.
Well, part of what I was trying to say is there's people want, when they say put up an apartment building close to very rich people, and they don't want it, and they think that the Met Council is pushing it, and you know, they want me to do something about it, well, what am I going to do about it, you see?
That's a local decision, Jerry.
Well, that's not how they think, you see. And since I'm an elected official in their area, who are they gonna complain to, you see? And they know I sit on the Met Council things here. And so they call me up and tell me these things of their thoughts, you see. So how, I'm trying to get from you guys, what can I say to these guys to kind of calm them down sometimes and, you know, as some of you know here, I'm very pro low-income housing. I have been for a lot of things, you see. So I'm not necessarily against this, you see, but what can I say to these folks to calm them down, you know?
Bill?
I can't go out there and shake them and say, you know what, grow up. See, I can't do that.
Everybody's entitled to their own opinion.
Well, of course they are, but I'm just curious.
Well, if I may, Jerry, if the property owner is deciding to want to put up a development, if the folks there don't like what's going into the development, they can just go ahead and buy the land.
Well, that's been my pet ask for a lot of people. Well, go out and buy the land yourself then. But they don't wanna hear that, you see.
Well, that's how it works.
But you're absolutely right. Then you buy up that 11 acres and then they can't put that 124 unit thing up and well, life will be great, right?
Bill's got his hand up first, then we'll go to
Just
Todd.
a quick comment, thank you, Madam Chair. On local government, I'd say clearly, when you look at all the comments, most common, you need some flexibility to offer back depending on where they're at. But I will say on density, the only way you can make affordability today is you gotta have smaller lots and bring costs down. And I watch it every day, the last 2 years with Pulte, they have a standard 3 unit, and right next to it, it's probably 4 to 5 units an acre on slab, 5. And they're building them left and right, because it's to get below $500,000, I gotta be small land. And that's what's just popping out. I personally wouldn't buy it, but they're selling them. So and we're doing 2050, I'd caution you, it's like Inver Grove Heights 5 years ago, a rental single-family housing project absorbed and built out immediately, and I'm seeing rental townhome units. 10 years ago, you never saw those. They're popping in every community because of affordability. And when you look at aging demographics, 1 out of 5 by 2040, 2050, it's the affordability. So if you're building big lots, somebody's gonna get caught 20 years from now. And because all these big lots, you're not having the young families coming in, et cetera. That's just the mark, but I can tell you to the builder side, these more units the acre, I can come in and make it work. And the other thing, when I had my local government hat on, just about every development we approved last 15 years was a PUD. And it would be the 3 units, even 2 units the acre because of wetlands. And then out towards the road, it was the higher density. And it's that flexibility. But if I got complaints from a resident, why'd you allow that? I blame the Met Council because they. So Jerry, the Met Council said, great.
They exist to take the blame.
Well, but,
We're happy.
you know, to the builder and city officials, you still control it. And if builders will walk, they're gonna go to the next community, and it's only where I can make the numbers work.
Well, and I totally get that, but saying that you really have to discourage any bigger lots, I don't think is
I don't.
productive. Because
I would
sometimes
agree.
there are really rich people who want a really big house on a big lot. And if they don't have a new place to build one, they're gonna go tear somebody else's house down on the kind of lot that they want and build a bigger house, which means we just lost a more affordable home. So there's 2 sides to that. I mean, poor people, middle class people like me were kind of stuck. But rich people can do whatever they want, wherever they want, and our rules just mean that somebody else's affordable house went away to be a lot for a bigger house.
So,
John.
kind of to address Jerry's comments, I always thought and I sometimes think I'm the only person associated with the Met Council that thinks the government that governs best is the one that governs least.
No, I'm
And-
there with you, John.
And I think what we see with this plan is it's a grab bag of unrelated causes. So, it's like the Met Council got together and put all their favorite causes into the 2050 plan. So it's no wonder that people that live on the outskirts that have negative impacts by the Met Council think they control everything. Because to a certain degree they do. So I would suspect maybe they're onto something rather than telling them to go fly a kite and they're crazy. Because there's so much power within the Met Council that they can kind of do anything. And we bump up against it all the time. And I mean, if you look at, my city submitted a bunch of questions. You know, for example, there's Objective 6, remedy past and present discriminatory land use practices. So that can be a grab bag for anything, you know. Whatever they make up past discriminatory land use patterns in Corcoran were, we are forced to remedy that. And I don't know of any, I don't know what to do, but it's just this nebulous new rule in the new 2050 plan that the city, as part of our official documentation, need a plan to remedy past and present discriminatory land use practices. And I don't know what the hell that means. I don't know how we do it, but when you have an open-ended something in your policy officially that anybody can latch onto and say, you, City of Corcoran, need to, fulfill our Objective 6, and you need to do this now because of that. I don't know. There's so much stuff in here that, and we're elected, and if we pushed so much activity on some of our stakeholders, we'd never do a second term. That's why. People push back on this because the Met Council does everything. They want to do everything. And like the legislature couldn't even do some of this stuff. And so, I don't know.
Well, one of the parts of responding to all of these comments is going to be to clarify what's actually a requirement and what's not, because there's a lot of things in here that were suggested by various stakeholders to be included as things that we have no authority to require anybody to do. So that will be clarified as part of the responses. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So,
Along that line, I think clarifying how you measure and calculate density, especially when it comes to stormwater, wetlands, et cetera, that's not clear everywhere.
well, and one of the challenges if we fundamentally change the way we calculate density and we change the rules for the different areas is that all of a sudden your data is not apples to apples. Like when we changed the affordability requirements, then all of our data had to start over because it was not an apples to apples kind of a thing. But yes, that clarifying that is part of what happens sort of after, correct?
Excuse me, Chair and committee members, the update of administrative guidelines, yes, it happens after.
Okay.
But they are approved by the council members.
So as I recall, the change in the required density from 3 to 4 as a policy change, it seemed to me that was to address the fact that there were some communities that weren't even developing at the 3 target, And so I think the idea was to try to bump up the target, to try to get people to plan for a density that might at least get them to where they're supposed to be. And I always had, I think through that process, a question as to whether that was the most effective approach to address that issue rather than maybe dealing with it more specifically with those communities. And so I had some concern about that policy as it went forward, but I understood kind of what the idea was, but I just wondered if that was the best solution. But if I'm misunderstanding what sort of the rationale was, let me know. But that's what I understood it to be, and so I can understand where some of the frustration comes from some of the communities. But also I see the other side of it, which is, this is what cities have to plan for 30 years from now. And so, to the extent that you set up zoning districts that have the ranges that work to appear to be planning for the 4 instead of 3, you're accomplishing that as a city in your comp plan. How things end up developing actually is a whole other thing. And I think that's where it gets into that whole idea of you have to sort of figure out maybe where you plan for some higher density in some areas so that your average works out to that 4 still. And maybe you're allowing, maybe you add a middle zoning district that is in part of your community that gets you a little higher, and then the new average works out to 4.0001, you're good. But it's all about planning as opposed to what ultimately actually happens, as I understand what these policies
But
do.
being at a 0.001 over the minimum is a very precarious place to be. Because it just takes one little change and now you're out of compliance. Do you have any comments?
But if a community doesn't develop at the target, then we have to figure out other solutions too. Because, if the marketplace doesn't meet what you've targeted to happen in your community, you can't control that as a city. You're just trying to set up a plan that on paper works for 30 years from now or 20 years from now or whatever. And so I'm sort of on the one hand saying I tend to agree with some of the concerns, and on the other hand saying, well, maybe it doesn't matter very much. I'm sort of walking that fence. But as a requirement for planning, it seems not quite as onerous as it might be perceived to be. But that's of course coming from a community that isn't in the same position.
Yeah,
so I have to be careful.
They're way different. You don't have any open space.
Well, and a lot of communities did their plan, 30 years ago of this is where all the pipes have to go and the sizes and everything for being a little over 3 units an acre. 33% increase in that can be problematic for some places, and that was part of the comments that was in here.
Yep, for sure. And I can just say, as a community that isn't in that position, still, when we did our last comp plan update, we were having to look at all of our different districts and look at all of our density numbers and working on getting the calculation up to where our average had to be, which I don't remember what it was, but it was still a challenge. But at the end of it, we said, well, here's our best shot at it. We'll see what actually happens.
The irony of my situation, Madam Chair, I think we're gonna be way over, because we have some things coming in and stuff like that. So it's the demand. Because what's going on in our town. We have some multi-family, some big buildings going up for multifamily, and it'll take care of our density for a long time, but it's the thing people don't like, especially in my area, don't like being told what to do.
Madam Chair.
Well, in such a heavy-handed way, that's.
I'm gonna give Kathy the floor, she's been very patient.
I'm sorry, I'm trying not to cough either, but I think one of the messages that I have learned, and Barbara and I have had this conversation many times, is also to remember that I think that a lot of people have the thought that Met Council has a lot of power, but the reality is it's all by state statute. So that's given to them by the legislature. And so when we're having these conversations with the people around us is to remind them that they're not just wielding power because they have it, it was given to them. And so somebody is making those decisions and then putting it all on the Met Council, because a lot of times it's, oh, well, this agency is already set up, so let's just give that to them as one of the requirements then down the road. And so those are some things that I just kind of think about when I have conversations with people is about Met Council is why in reality it feels like it's always a power play. There are reasons why it exists, and that is because of state statute.
Well, and we don't actually have as much power as people think we have
Exactly.
either, because if somebody brings in a comp plan, we don't evaluate it by whether we like it or not. We evaluate it by does it meet the rules, and as long as it's not a substantial departure from regional system plans, how you develop within your city is what the locals want to do, as long as they obey the rules.
Exactly.
The density thing is, for a lot of edge communities, is a big rule, and I think there's a lot of people on the council that wanna have more discussion with the edge communities to kind of work through that, because I think it's better to be cooperative rather than
Yes,
I would agree.
absolutely.
coercive.
So are those being scheduled? Those
Well,
conversations?
that grid of meetings that was on the one of the last slides is, it might still change to have more meetings and more discussion, and council members are having discussion with their individual cities as well. So, Bill,
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So there's not a drop dead date on as far as this, when this has to be approved. If they had to go another month, 2 months or whatever,
well,
that'd be fine.
that's being figured out, cause there's some things like the transportation policy plan that are on a deadline. So, but I haven't gotten any word. Do you know any details on if it can be pushed back at all?
My understanding is that it's pushed as far back as it can go. That's what the schedule was originally set to do, to allow as much time as possible.
The big issue is getting the transportation policy plan done in time for its drop dead date, as far as I know. Jerry had his hand up, and then John.
I'd just like to say Kathy's comments. She's right in the sense that Met Council has got where you are today because of the legislature. We don't want to have it, we'll pass it off to Met Council, let them deal with it. Like they wanted to pass all problems, and then they can bash you for trying to take care of it.
Yep, everybody hates us, up and
Yeah.
down.
But on the other hand, I think you're underestimating your power. You are very powerful. You are. And you don't think you are, but you are, so,
Okay,
okay.
Bill,
No.
oh, John.
Once this plan gets initiated, one thing that I disagree with you, Madam Chair, on is Corcoran went back and forth with our plan a bunch of times, and I hope that it gets clarified, the difference between complete and approved.
Yep.
Because I know that they have power, but we had a lot of discussions about and legislative power, but we had a lot of discussions about whether somebody liked our ideas and marked it incomplete, or didn't like our ideas and marked that section incomplete, rather than it's complete and being done with it, even if you don't like how they're gonna tackle a particular issue. So that's part of like the legislative authority versus individuals' discretion on some of the policy given legislative authority.
Yeah, and I remember that, it came out in the sort of after-action review of comp plans, and that's gonna be a discussion in the next step, once this is done, of how do those plans get evaluated.
Yes.
So it's not been forgotten.
No, we're talking about it this week.
Okay. Yes. Anything else? Has everybody talked out? Wow,
We have more agenda.
yeah, I know,
Did we go too fast earlier?
no, you guys did great. I thank you for having a robust discussion. I just was worried we weren't gonna have enough time, and we're actually on schedule, so that's fantastic. And Bill has to leave. Thank you for being here.
Good to see you, Bill.
See you, Bill.
Goodbye.
Lower density.
Okay. Next up, we have an introduction to Imagine 2050 Outcomes Measurement. Sarah Henriksen and Kristen Riva Torres.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Hello, committee members. Thank you. This is my first time speaking at LUAC in over a decade working at the council. So very exciting to be here and to be talking about this work, which on theme, we're talking about 2050, Imagine 2050, and how we're going to really look at and evaluate its implementation and how that aligns with trends that we see in the region. So it feels very on theme for today's discussion in a way. But this is just an introductory conversation, but we're going to provide a little bit of background about the outcomes measurement program and why we're kind of taking a different approach with this development guide adoption. We will present some very preliminary draft land use policy measures. Okay, so we'll have a chance to dive into some data today, but we're really not prepared, I don't think, to get super in the weeds today. In part two, because while Angela's here to answer some questions, there are some shared measures with other areas, other policy plans, and I'm not sure that we would have necessarily the expertise to go deeply on some of those topics. So I just wanted to preface it with that, because this does seem like a group that wants to dig in. So I appreciate that for future conversations, so we'll make sure that we have the right folks here to answer questions on specifics as we refine those things going forward. And then we just have a couple discussion questions today if we get there. So I did take a moment before today's presentation and kind of looked across the counties and cities that you all represent, and I did find some examples of like existing measurement, which is, you know, all around us, right? So we have counties reporting and annual annual reports. We have some KPIs here from the city of Corcoran. Ramsey County and Dakota County have dashboards and other information that they are reporting either up to the state or just part of their performance improvement, programs that they have at the county level. So, a lot of folks are already engaged in this work. And here at Met Council, we do this work as well. A lot of times folks are bringing the results of programs to you. They are sharing annual reports on various programs too. But I think that what this program is going to do is going to bring that information together in a way that really frames it in relationship to the policy plan and to the development guide. And so, we're doing this, it's kind of, the information's out there, but we want to package it and present it in a way that really helps us all understand the implementation, the outcomes that we're seeing as a result of the implementation. Some of this work began in Thrive MSP 2040 and actually in the 2030 Regional Development Framework as well. There were measures articulated in both of those policy plans. In those regional development guides. With Thrive though, the housing policy plan kind of came out up front with some indicators that were adopted about a year after that plan was adopted. With Thrive MSP 2040, I think we were looking at about 4 years later. We got together and with a group of council members and presented some measures that we thought articulated the implementation of Thrive. All of this work really centers on the accountability, wanting to articulate, what is the change that we expect to see in the region as a result of this guide, as a result of local governments implementing their comprehensive plans. And so we are building on that work. However, I would say that we have not fully resourced this work so that we could do it consistently, so we can make sure that we are really activating those measures and having them in front of us at least on an annual basis and really reviewing that information consistently. If you have KPIs or if you have OKRs or there's a whole eye chart of different things that folks or acronyms folks use.
Acronyms.
Yeah,
Acronyms.
what did I say?
KPI, like
Oh, yeah.
no one knows what those mean.
Right, key performance indicators and objectives and key results, right. There's a whole world of measurement that gets kind of wild and you can really get lost in it. But the bottom line is if you're not looking at the information, if you're not using it, why, right? Why are we doing it? So we want to make sure that we are activating conversation around this, not just putting together a bunch of data and posting it to our website and directing folks to look at it, which is something that I have done in my time here at Met Council. So I would like a change in that regard, and Sarah was hired to help us bring that change about, so we're excited about that. Also just thinking about the framework aspect of things, right? We have a regional development guide, it spells out regional goals. We have policy plans that name these objectives and policies within them. So, what level do we want to measure things at? How do we want to report things? How do we want to bring those things together to talk about issues that are often really interrelated and interconnected? And then not something we're going to focus on today, but also just thinking about target setting. So, if we're going to bring about changes in our region, like how quickly will that happen? Or how quickly do we want it to happen? Or at what scale does it need to happen? And those are conversations I think that are best had once we kind of have the measures in front of us and we want to think about what that looks like in a more specific way. I'm going to skip this slide but come back to it in a second because I want to start with this one, which is why this work is important. I kind of just described some of these things, but I think it really is about transparency. As a public institution, all of us have a responsibility to the public to describe our work, to describe its impact and outcomes. So we want to put that forward and not make it difficult to see. Also, it comes down to this articulation of change. Like we can talk about things improving, we can talk about things, becoming a certain way, but how are we operationalizing that, right? Like sometimes it really is in the details of how we describe something. And so we want to make sure that, again, we're being clear about what we see as the change we think are moving us towards our outcomes. It's also an opportunity to talk about successes and challenges, right? Like if we are not seeing a needle move, but we expect it to, why? If we are seeing something really depart from something we would expect to see, why? Or if we're like not making progress fast enough in an area where we think there should be, to really talk about that and really engage everybody in that conversation. So there is great dialogue potential here just by bringing together some information and looking at it together on a regular basis. And again, that opportunity to elevate those critical issues that might be at play. And then also when it comes to, our outcomes and goals, thinking about the scale of things, thinking about the trade-offs of things. This type of work, outcomes measurement work, can really help make that clearer so that we can have informed conversations about what all of that needs to look like. So then when we think about accountability, and I know this text is very small even on the screen here, but this is the 4 values that are being adopted with Imagine 2050. Accountability value really calls out measurement. It literally says measurable outcomes here. But I think that when we think about those co-benefits I just described, it really speaks to all these values of stewardship and leadership and equity, making things visible, talking about them, coming to shared agreement about like where we're starting and where we're going. So in a huge plan, like Imagine 2050, a huge guide, each policy area wrote about their objectives, their policies, and their actions. And sometimes the objectives and policies were sort of at different levels. So what we looked at, sometimes in some plans we're looking at the policy level and trying to come up with measurement because those policies were a little bit more contained. Here with the land use objectives, with land use policy, we're looking at the objective level. The objective level works for most areas of Imagine 2050 and allows us to kind of be at like the scale where we're talking about interrelated issues, we're talking about broad, we're talking about directional things. When we get into policies and actions, if we were to do measurement at those levels, we might be like counting up the number of hours we do something, or these output descriptions that I don't necessarily think are always that useful. Chances are we have the information, but is it really like rolling up to tell us how we are, if we're seeing the results that we expect? I feel like I had one more thing to say before I hand this over to you, Sarah. Oh, I think it was just to emphasize two things before Sarah starts to get into some of the information we've prepared for you today. You know, water, housing, parks, and transportation all have performance measures or measures that we're gonna be developing with them. And with land use, we see a lot of shared measures, right? Because their land use is so fundamental to some of these other things. And so that's why I said that at the top of the presentation, that we're gonna be showing you some things that we might not be able to speak to too much in depth. But we're really gonna welcome other ideas about what to measure with when it comes to land use that would make you feel like you understand how the implementation of the land use policies are going. I also mentioned this, but I will reiterate it, and I'm pretty sure Sarah will reiterate it again. But these are a draft, okay? So over the summer, the policy plan was being written. It's difficult to measure something when we don't have the details of that. So the ideas that you'll see today, they're based on looking at that public engagement. How do people describe these issues? What did they seem interested in knowing about? We talked with our policy teams, so worked with Angela's staff and other staff across the council to get their ideas about the measures and the data availability on some of these things. We also looked at different peer agencies. How do other regions measure this? How do, are there federal measures, state measures? We were looking up and down. And then, we also started to look at public comment and consider, again, what folks are reacting to and bringing forward, and what are the language that they're using, because we do want to make sure that our measures connect with folks. So there is lots more to do on this. We are initiating this now because the plan is at a stage in which it's kind of firm enough for us to move forward in pulling together ideas. So please know that this is the front end of that conversation. And I will pass it over to Sarah. Thank you.
All right, so just a few things to keep in mind as we consider measurement today. First is that there is no one perfect data point that will describe how we're doing at the council. We know that the region is a large and complex place. There's a lot of diversity and lived experiences and residents. So instead of one data point, we should use a collection of information to understand our impact in the region. So taken collectively, measures should be relevant to all key stakeholders. People should be able to see themselves in this work. Measures should also be trackable over time, so less of like a snapshot and more of a movie so that we can understand changes over time. Measures should also be sensitive to change. There isn't really any value in measuring a number that we don't expect to change, right? And we also want to be capturing our impact in the region as best we can. So not just outputs, not just the number of hours of technical assistance we offer, but a more meaningful measure might be something related to competencies or skills learned. So instead of just checking a box, we want to make sure that we are measuring our actual impact. And finally, just not limited to required reporting. That's sort of like the floor of measurement work, not the ceiling in terms of accountability and how we're doing.
One other point to make here that we didn't include on the slide, but I also just wanted to mention you're the second group, and it only by a number of hours, who has been engaged in this conversation externally. So this has been, we've looked at a lot of information that people in the region and local governments have brought forward to us. But in terms of having the conversation, we just had a meeting with the parks directors earlier today, and this is the beginning of that work. So one of the things that we talked about with that group, so it's not here on your slide today, but is really thinking about specificity a little bit too. So when we roll everything up to a regional average, we look at medians, sometimes we lose we lose some information that is actually really valuable, because this is a very diverse region with various things going on. And so, really wanting to parse data more by looking at modes, looking at community designations, looking at different population groups, different housing types, that might feel a little overwhelming right now, but I think that it will kind of bring things into sharper focus, and we don't want to kind of end up looking at numbers that at a certain point sometimes have almost no basis in reality, right? Like, think about like the average rent for the region. That's a real number for sure, but we're rolling up different housing
Who
types,
cares what it
bedroom
is?
sizes, is anyone paying for that particular thing, right? And so it can kind of get a little abstract, and so we want to make sure that we're like rooting this in real experience. So please continue, Sarah, thank you.
Just also to add that the perfect set of measures doesn't exist. This is sort of an iterative process. We don't expect to get it right the first time, but we're going to do our best for measurement and then work from there. Okay, so here are the 8 land use objectives. I'm sure you are familiar with them. We'll run through them super quick. So the first one is respect the relationship with land and water as a foundation for regional growth. Second one is to maximize opportunities for growth in places well served by transit, bicycle, and pedestrian infrastructure. 3 is establishing vibrant, inclusive, connected, and safe communities for people to live in. 4 is prioritizing land use and development activities that protect, restore, and enhance natural systems at all scales. 5, people in all types of communities find housing opportunities that align with their needs. 6, remedy past and present discriminatory land use practices. 7, implement land use and development practices that reduce GHG emissions, embed climate adaptation, and create resilient communities. And 8 is support the economic well-being of our region and its communities. So before, like Kristen said before, just want to reiterate again that we do a lot of measurement work here at the council, whether it's through reporting to you, reporting to Community Development Committee, or the Committee of the Whole. So we already have a lot of information. We're just trying to better leverage and better package it into something that makes a little bit more sense about the implementation of Imagine 2050. Okay, so here are a few measurement ideas that have been discussed internally. These are still very much ideas. They are malleable. They are just meant as a starting point for discussion. You'll notice that all of them relate to the broader themes of density and development, probably no surprise for our land use folks. You'll also notice something we found as we worked through each objective is that there are many measures that can speak toward progress on multiple objectives in land use policy. So the first idea here is that minimum density requirements for new connections to the regional sewer system are met. And that speaks to land use objectives 1, 4, and 7. That's not a new measure. That's something that we already keep tabs on. We just don't frame it or report on it as outcome measurement. The second one is that net density of recorded plats increase. That's measured by units per acre, separated out by community designation. That also speaks to objectives 1, 4, and 7. The third one is a new one for us. It's the acreage of infill development and redevelopment. That speaks to objectives 1, 3, 4, and 7. We could narrow it down or break it out by different communities. The fourth one on this list is the acreage of cleanup funded by LCA's tax-based revitalization grants. That's speaking to objectives 1, 3, 7, and 8. This measure does align with information that we already report, but we know that there's sort of like an ongoing discussion about the goals of the LCA program, so that one might be adjusted based on how those discussions go.
One thing that might be more meaningful in that is how many of those that are cleaned up actually turn into something. It's just cleaning it and then leaving it vacant, you're not really getting anywhere, but if something actually gets built on it and gets returned to the tax base, then that's the actual purpose of the grants, is to return underutilized land to full use.
What is the acronym of?
Tax-based revitalization account, it's
LCA.
Livable Communities Act.
Yeah.
It's a group of grant programs.
And the TBRA money comes from the fiscal disparities pool. 5 million comes off of the top of that. and it's designated by the state to get land back into taxable use that isn't currently being utilized, so.
So the last one on this list is that, or sorry, the second to last one, new affordable housing is developed across communities. That's something that we already track and measure with our housing folks, but it's not always a part of the land use conversations. So just really centering that. That speaks to objectives 2, 3, 5, and 6. And the last one on this list is that local governments adopt strategies to create affordable housing. And again, that's something that we already keep tabs on. Our housing team is certainly well tuned into strategies that local governments in the region use and find effective, but just trying to keep those housing and development pieces centered in the land use conversations. All right, our next set of possible measures. These relate more to transportation and climate. The first one looks at average travel times by transportation mode to everyday destinations. This is something our colleagues over in MTS already keep track of. Second one is miles of dedicated bike and pedestrian infrastructure per capita. We see this supporting objectives related to growth in places well served by infrastructure, which is objective 2. Vibrant and connected communities, which is objective 3, and reducing GHG emissions, which is objective 7. The third one on the list is travel shed to parks or green space by mode. That's also a new measure, but one that relates to 4 of the 8 land use objectives. And it's actually a topic that we've seen brought up in committee conversations, community engagement, often public comment. The fourth is that local governments adopt strategies to address climate change. We certainly know that climate change is a topic of concern across the region. There's only so much that we at the Met Council can do. So similar to the affordable housing one, it's more about understanding what's happening at the local level, and certainly shining a spotlight on some of that work that often goes unnoticed.
Can I ask a question?
Of course you can.
So the number one job in Corcoran is self-employed, home-based businesses. So I don't know if you so obviously you walk to your barn or in your own chair at your house. So I think that I just you should address some of those things when you think about, like, the average Corcoran person doesn't drive very far to work. I don't know if that would be addressed by just taking how far it is to a major job center when most a majority or our biggest employer is yourself in Corcoran.
That's a great point, thank you.
Yeah, so the last one on this list is areas of concentrated carbon sequestration. So this builds off work currently being done as part of an EPA grant that the Met Council has, but really trying to identify and prioritize areas where a large amount of carbon sequestration is happening.
And before we get off of this, when we look at road infrastructure, we also have like a quality, not just quantity measure. Bike and pedestrian infrastructure suffers from the same issue. If you've ever been going boom, boom, boom down the bike trail with your bike. So maybe include something about the quality of the infrastructure and also how much it's used, because if you're just building at every place and nobody's riding on it, that's not a good use of public money.
Thank you. All right, so one last thing to highlight. Imagine 2050 reflects a big shift in how we as a Met Council operate. This is clear in a few ways, one of which is the renewed emphasis on engagement. The measurement program should capture this change in how we do work, but to be quite honest, we don't really know what that looks like yet. There's a lot of time, energy, and resources spent on engagement, and we want to represent that work. But we're not sure how all of these pieces will be implemented. So we think that the measurement work will become more clear as work progresses on the implementation of the equity frameworks the commitments to the American Indian Advisory Council, and what our sort of like convening and our partnerships look like moving forward.
Did we not have input at all from the American Indian Advisory Council, or what's?
Oh, no, we have, they gave their input directly to the council. We had a committee of the whole.
In the past?
Yeah.
So why do they get special status if we have taken?
They gave their recommendations, they haven't been reacted to yet.
Yeah.
Are you saying that was part of, say, Thrive 2040 or prior
No,
efforts?
I'm saying it's part
It's
of
just this time around.
2050
Yeah,
input.
so I think that was what Jonathan was getting at.
Just getting started.
Was
Yeah.
it?
It didn't
you
happen
think
in
we-
2040.
We never had took input ever from them? Aren't
No.
they?
Yeah, we're trying to make it better on communicating with the communities.
Okay, I don't understand that, but I'll skip it.
Okay.
So we've also heard interest among staff and in past community engagement to better understand the Met Council's technical assistance. So really looking at the effectiveness of the tools and the programming, both through requirements and our influence at the local level. And other assistance like the comprehensive planning process and funding, just having a better understanding of how we're doing and where we might be falling short. So yeah, more to come on that work as implementation continues. So now some discussion questions. So the first one is any reactions or questions to cross-cutting measures or ideas presented here? We've heard some, but welcome any more. The second is what other ideas do you have for land use policy measurement outcomes or how? And how should we engage with our local government partners in the development of these measures? And with that, we'll open it up. Feel free to respond to any, all, anything else you might want to add.
In 3 minutes, yes.
Jerry.
Yeah. Speaking of Jonathan's remark, I think, it seems to me, why was the Indian Council given so much space? Why wasn't there 20 different organizations that were able to come in?
Oh, there were lots of different organizations, and there had been sort of piecemeal discussion with the tribal organizations, but this was trying a different approach to get a more in-depth response from them. There's been a number of different initiatives trying to get in-depth response from different parts of the region.
How come they weren't put on the list here then or something?
It seems like a special class situation.
Yeah, I mean, that's the way I looked at it too. I mean, they got top billing. There was 3 things and they were one of them. Why wasn't?
It's a
Everybody else out there
PowerPoint,
too,
Jerry.
you
There's
see.
a lot of other inputs that have happened. It's just a
Well, I'm
PowerPoint.
sure there is, but, I'm just curious.
Phil,
I guess I don't have a lot of questions. First of all, I really don't know what to ask right now until we get some more data and as you continue on with, these presentations. I would hope that you would still be open to changes as we continue through this process. This looks like it's brand new, so I'm just gonna wait and see how things develop, so, but thank you for
yeah,
doing that.
having another bite at it later when it's a little more fleshed out would be.
Yeah, that's what I'm waiting for, the way to put it, thank you. Good job.
Dan?
I would say number 3 is really important, and I don't know exactly what the how should be, but I think it's important to make sure that we're doing that, because I think ultimately the information that's developed as part of this is going to be very helpful to local communities to measure how they're doing or how they compare to the region or those types of things. And so I think it's very important to say, we're looking at measuring this outcome. Is this going to be useful to you at the local level? If all the local communities say, well, gosh, no, then maybe we don't need to spend that council resources measuring it at least, or sharing it or whatever. So I think that's the one thing that stood out to me in those 3 questions, was just making sure that, already we have a lot of ways that we engage with the local government partners through all of these processes, and so it just, I think, be a matter of making sure of tying into those to make sure that we get that feedback in relation to this specific area.
Thank you.
I also appreciate your comments about measuring actual outcomes as opposed to outputs. The classic example in our city was that we promote the statistic of the number of miles of streets that we plow every year. And I kept pointing out to our staff that we have the same number of miles of streets every year, and we plow them all. This measure doesn't tell us anything.
It's
you know.
100%.
Right, yes, exactly. So
Easy to update that
it is,
chart,
it is
right?
a mindset thing to
Yes.
look at what you how close you're getting to what you're trying to accomplish rather than, just what you're doing. Yeah.
Exactly.
So I appreciate that.
Anybody else?
Great.
Okay,
Great.
thank
Thank
you.
you so much, Madam Chair and committee members, for your time.
Thank you.
Look at that. Look at that.
Perfect.
Right on.
I did the time management dance properly today.
But we have to stay late and wash the dishes.
I have a dishwasher, that's why you just chuck them in the picnic basket. Okay, there being no further business to come before the committee, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much for your participation.